Hello, and welcome to this episode of a Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Galen Nuttall, and I have a quick question before we hop on over to the episode. Did you know that many physicians are overpaying taxes due to not leveraging their corporation effectively? I've seen cases where a physician is on track to lose out on millions of dollars in retirement because they're not using their corporation effectively. And if you are unsure if you are making the most of the unique entity that is the professional corporation, creating a plan with me and my team of corporate planning experts might be a good move. If you're interested in a plan that shows you how to make the most of your corporation, save on taxes, secure your legacy, and create a thriving retirement, we can create a personalized, powerful plan for you for a flat fee with no hidden commissions, and there is no obligation for you to buy any products from us. If you want to know more, head on over to galenhelpsdocs.com. That's Galen helpsdocs.com. Read up on what it covers and click on the book a call button to book a free call to explore whether a custom flat fee plan is a good fit for you. And now on with the show. All right, welcome everyone to this episode of a Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I am joined by Eve Rodsky. Eve is one of my favorite authors in the world, and we'll talk about why. So Eve, for anyone who doesn't know, is a New York Times bestselling author of a book called Fair Play, which we're going to talk about, and another book called Unicorn Space, which we'll also talk about. Eve, thank you so much for joining me here. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're one of my favorite couples, so I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate it. And so I can talk a little bit about so I found out about you because my wife read a book called Fair Play, and she hinted that I should read it too. And I didn't really listen for a while. And then finally I was like, okay, I'm going to read it. And I'd love for you maybe to kind of give us a sort of your summary of what Fair Play is all about and how people have implemented it. And then we can dive into maybe what that looks like in conjunction with what a lot of my audience do. The reality of a lot of my audience, if they are in a relationship, sometimes one of them makes a lot more money than the other one, or they have very different sort of approaches to their profession. So that's something we can dive into as well. But yeah, I'd love to hear first sort of what you're up to.
Well, thanks for having me again, and for your listeners for hanging in to listen to an author talk about, housework and chores and losing interest in your own life, all of these sort of dark topics. But as a lot of men tell me, I like to go dark to go light. So maybe I'll stay a little dark in the beginning and just say that for me, this was a personal journey, right? Galen, I didn't set out to be an expert on the gender division of labor. That was not on my third grade, what do you want to be when you grow up board? It definitely wasn't what I answered when Elizabeth Warren asked us that question in our Harvard Law School orientation. But my own life and midlife, my life stage of being in midlife, I had a lot of breakdowns after my second son, Ben, was born. The first I talk about in Fair Play, which was my husband, Seth, sending me a text that said, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." And we talked a little bit about that journey and when we talked before, but I felt very psychologically abandoned by my partner in his assumptions that because he made more money than me, even though I'm more highly educated, but I chose a field, philanthropy, which doesn't get paid as much as private equity, that somehow that meant I would be in charge of everything in the home, childcare and housework, and losing myself in the process and actually losing my career in the process. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because then as I pull back on my career and he got more successful, then those patterns kept perpetuating and it was getting worse. And on the same time, I was being abandoned by my workplace, which was telling me that if I wanted to come back after my second son, Ben, was born, that I would have to pump breast milk in a closet, and I would lose all my direct reports. So punishing me for being a mother. And on top of that, I felt psychologically abandoned and physically abandoned by my community because being a parent is so isolating, especially in America, where we have no universal childcare, we have no paid leave. So that was a time in my life that I started to introspectively think about what was happening in my marriage, because I felt, Galen, that my only recourse at that time was, as one woman said to me, the way you get to a fair division of labor is just 3 words. And I was hanging on every word. I'm like, what are those 3 words? And she said court ordered custody.
Mm.
And that's when I realized like I would be replicating the patterns of my parents because I grew up in a single mother household. So instead of doing all that or leaving Seth or eat, pray, loving it out of my marriage, because 82% of divorces are initiated by women in one of the last surveys on this area, I decided to sort of get my ass in gear and become my own client and solve my own issues around my marriage. And that's sort of how Fair Play originated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that about your journey of, this one event of like, oh, I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries, and like the assumption that you were going to take care of all these things, and how it like really kind of came to a head. And so there's really two things that I think are worth sort of noting. Is one of the things I really got from your book, and certainly a pattern that I had fallen into with Emma, was we just kind of ended up in this default state, and we never had a conversation about who was going to do what around the house. And what it defaulted to is a concept that I love from your book, which was the minimum standard of care, which is like, what is someone willing to put up with? So like in our world, like, so post Fair Play, I'm in charge of the dishes. So I take care of all the dishes, but my minimum standard of care was I'm going to let them pile up until the end of the day and like clean them all up. And Emma's like, that drives me nuts. Like, I hate seeing the clutter. Like, I come downstairs and it just makes me feel like it's dirty. So we came to an agreement, like, okay, I'm going to tackle them more regularly than once a day because it doesn't work for her to just have them pile up like that. But we never would have had that conversation, or who knows if we ever would have had that conversation if we hadn't read your book. So I think that's one thing that I really got, is I think a lot of people end up in sort of like a default. And from my understanding, at least from what I see, is the default is that if it's a male female couple, in all likelihood, the wife or the female partner is going to be the one who ends up doing more. Yeah.
And I think so many men, especially these amazing men, because Fair Play became a love letter to men, really resonated with Fair Play because it's not a book about 50-50. And that's why the Wall Street Journal, took an op-ed from me, because what I'm trying to explain is that I'm not here to tell you how to live, that you have to have gender equity beliefs, or even believe that your time when you make the money for the household is not more valuable than your partner's time who does unpaid labor. I'm not really here to change attitudes, but I am here to change behaviors. And what I now know about studying, especially heteronormative couples, women married to men, is that if a man is the one who makes all of the money, and there's a stay-at-home partner, Galen, the assumption that that partner needs to handle everything else other than bringing in money is a recipe for divorce. And we know that the only factor over 75 years that mattered to whether men were alive at 85 was the quality of their relationships at 55. So why this became a love letter to men is I want you to live, and I want you to be healthy, and I want you to live as long as women. So if we can equate the fact that these small death by 1,000 cuts, these dishes in the sink, or in my case, being the fulfiller of my husband's smoothie needs, if we can recognize that, yes, I'm doing very important things for this family, I'm a breadwinner. If we can recognize that that conversation just doesn't work, it doesn't work to default that one person does everything outside the home and one person does everything in the home. It just doesn't work. And I wish I could tell you it did, but those gender roles, unless they're really inculcated through God and church, even then, the people in my studies that are part of those churches still feel resentful and angry about being in the relationship. So we just need a new way. It's not 50-50, but what I will say is that unpaid labor in the home, childcare and housework is more than a full-time job.
Yes.
It's way more than one full-time job. So we know that not one person can handle that all, and nor should they, because there's a lot of the cards. That's the metaphor. This is a card game. There's 100 cards that make up what you can choose to do for your home. You don't have to do them all, like holiday cards. But when you discuss those cards and you recognize which ones have value, which ones you want to hold, it changes everything, even if it's not 50-50.
No, I really like that. And it's a great reminder for me that that you're not necessarily for 50-50, but what I'm hearing is like the value in a conversation around what's happening. And so and I love the cards. We have the physical cards, and we literally laid them all out, and our kids watched us slide them around and figure out who was going to cover what and which things we just don't do because we don't really do tooth fairy stuff like that. So we're like, okay, cool. We don't need to worry about that card. So we didn't have to worry about who was going to put the money under the pillow or whatever. But like, so what would you say? Like, and I mean, and certainly in my case, like it was that Emma, initiated the conversation, and I think there was some trepidation there of like, wow, we'd been together for like, I don't know, 15 years at this point. So it's like, are we really going to change anything at this point? Like, is it really going to work? Galen going to read the book? So like, what do you think when it comes to like starting that conversation of, hey, this just isn't working the way it's working? And as a follow-up question, so like, how to start the conversation? And then like, what is the conversation to have after, well, I work 60 hours a week in a clinic or whatever, like just, tired as heck. Like, why should I do anything around the house? Like, where do we go with that conversation? And then also that thought process.
Well, the good news is there's a secret formula. So we start going dark, we can go light. And the secret formula is really one around boundaries, systems, and communication. And I think you just said tooth fairy. So it sort of triggered a story. And it happened sort of right around when we first talked. Did I tell you the tooth fairy story about
I'm kind of remembering it, but remembering it, but definitely go for it.
Yeah. I think I'll go for it again if no one heard our first episode. But this was a couple who decided to play fair play during the pandemic. And it was a not typical, because actually most couples are now dual earner, but it was a stay-at-home mother with two older children and not older children, a 6-year-old and someone in middle school, and a working dad, working outside of the house father. And they decided to play. And one of the things that Richard took on was the tooth fairy, which made me laugh when you said that that's not a card in your home. But for them, magical beings, Santa, right. They even do lucky leprechaun because she has Irish family. So I didn't know about that magical being, but apparently that's a thing. So that was important to them. So the minimum standard of care was that they would do magical beings. That's one of 100 cards. And so Richard said he would take it on. And she was like, great. Because he had noticed actually he was doing more cards that fall in one of the suits of fair play called the home suit. So he noticed he was doing more dishes and he was doing more taking out the garbage. And he was doing more bill paying, but he was actually not doing much with the kids. And so he wanted to take over a card in the magic suit, which is more about sort of how do you connect with your family, is how we connect is who we become. And so he takes on Tooth Fairy. And the first time that it's like his second, I don't remember, his second or third, tooth of his younger child, his younger daughter, the tooth fairy didn't come. So this is back to your communication, right? Because if people are saying, well, we don't communicate about domestic life, it's too triggering. What Amy realized was that she was someone who said that I don't want to have these conversations. But what she realized was she was already communicating about domestic life because she calls herself a verbal assassin. What she would have done before fair play is said to Richard, okay, so you don't give a shit about our kids, like you never have. You're always working. You can't even put $1 under the pillow. You're the worst father ever. I knew that you would ruin the magic for our kids. Like that's sort of the rumination she told me she would have said to him, or the verbal diarrhea, or whatever you want to call it. And Richard said to me that he would have actually, his communication style would have been to avoid, but also to blame Amy for not reminding him, to get defensive. Yeah. And to blame her for not reminding him to put the $1 under the pillow. So that was their dynamic of how they communicated about domestic life. Post fair play, it's very small, but Amy says that she holds her tongue. She recognized that the part of the secret formula of boundary systems and communication is to have a system. The system is that Richard owns magical beings and you have to be able to let someone carry through their mistake. So he did that. He said, I own it. That was his first way to disarm her, by saying, it's my bad. This was my card. I will handle it. And then she said, okay, well, if you're handling it, then, obviously, it matters to our child and I'm going to step out. So Richard tells me he emails toothfairy@gmail.com. And thank God for this woman, because of course it's a woman out there who responds. And she says, sorry, supply chain issues because of COVID or whatever. I'm in a backlog of teeth, but when I'm late, I bring double the money. And Richard prints this email from the Tooth Fairy out for his daughter. And then he put the double the money under her pillow the next night. That's it. Small story, not 50-50, but a completely different way, Galen, to look at how we can manage and connect with each other over these important, they're not chores. This is our humanity.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a beautiful example. Like you said, it's a small thing, but obviously to a child, magical beings are very important. And, if the child was excited about waking up to the money and all that. And I think that, carrying through the mistake, I think is another thing that maybe keeps people from doing this. Like there's a meme that goes around where it's like, I want my husband to do the dishes, but he needs to do them my way. Yeah. Or like, I'd love for somebody to load the dishwasher. No, not like that, that sort of thing. Because we all have like our own way of doing it. So I think that's a big part of it too, is like being.
And we got to give men space. We got to give men space. I mean, I think the hardest thing for me to figure out in this process was that as much as women felt the mental load of being overwhelmed, men were not saying to me, this was in 17 countries, there was nobody really who said to me, I think my wife's time is not valuable and she should do everything. There was really very, very few people like that. Most men married to women or partnered with women were telling me that the reason they don't do more in the home is because they can't get anything right.
Yeah.
Because they don't know their role. In the workplace, we call that psychological safety. You talk about that. We know that that's not a great place to live. Even my Aunt Marion's Mahjong group feels more safe to me, Galen, because you know the expectations, or if you don't bring snack twice, you're out. But the home has no expectations, especially for men. And so it can be really, really, I think, troubling when men try to step in and sort of get that rebuke.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can totally relate to that, of things I've tried to do, and it's like I didn't do it the quote unquote right way. And I mean, our life is a little bit interesting in the sense that I was a stay-at-home dad for 2.5 years. So for 2.5 years, it was my job to, do a lot of things around the house, laundry, cooking, kids. So then when I went back to work, I thought, oh, like I've got this figured out. And I didn't at all. Like it just defaulted back to this new setup that was Emma doing more around the house than me. And I mean, more importantly than more, it's more of like, we just didn't have that conversation of like, what does life look like now? Like I'm going back to work, like, and that thing of minimum standard of care, like it's more important to Emma that we have fresh meals every night than it is to me. I'm like, I could have sandwiches probably like 5 nights a week and still be okay with it. Like I wouldn't be worried about it. But she's like, no, like it's just something it's just a value to her. So now I get it. So like in our case, I cook Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and she cooks the rest of the week. And it's like, but now we've had a conversation about it. So we know.
And by the way, I love that you said it's a value to her, because very few people in my conversations 10 years ago when I started this knew any stories about their partner when I brought them up about the fair play cards. So it was so interesting because I would say, like, where did your partner travel when they were a kid? I don't know. I would say, who were their best friends in first grade? No idea. What's their extended family look like? Well, I met a couple of them, not sure. What values did their parents instill in them? I don't know. So it was shocking how little we know about each other, right? But we assume because we're partnered, we know so much about each other. So what I would say is that if this conversation feels overwhelming to you, or you don't know where to start, a great place to start is to use the fair play cards, not to divvy up the systems of unpaid labor yet. You can go back to episode 1 to hear sort of more about the nitty gritty of how you do that. But I think really the best way to start is to just pull one card out of the 100. And again, you can find them online at Fair Play Life. You can find them in the book, but pull a card and just start asking questions.
Yeah.
So what you said about fresh meals, like, do you know what Emma would say about why fresh meals are important to her? Did her family grow up on a farm? Did she have a family that cooked? Like, do you have any idea why?
Yeah, it's a good question, because and it was something I was going to say, is that I find that sometimes the things that we care about them because our family didn't care about them.
Exactly.
And sometimes,
yes.
like, so I know people who are it's really important for them to have good food because their family didn't have good food growing up. And then other times it's a continuation of what was important. Like
100%.
so like in our case, I think it's a continuation of what was important to Emma's family, which was her mom was around making dinner pretty much every night and still, I mean, I don't I mean, they live in the same town as us, so I'm pretty sure she still pretty much cooks a fresh meal every night. And in my house, that was not the case. It was not. It was a lot of leftovers. And it was fine. I mean, I was like a lot of sandwiches, a lot of TV dinners here and there. So I didn't grow up with it being all that important. But I'm pretty sure for Emma, it would be a continuation of that. Like whether it's, and sometimes I don't think it's super conscious decision, right? It's just kind of like, this is just how things go. Like, this is how we do things. So, and it would
exactly, but it's not right. But it's also not conscious because it is, like you said, I think what is so beautiful, your insight, that it's a continuation of either a reaction to the past or a continuation of what someone saw and their value system that was set. And so how important to really, for your own self, to really understand, like, are you a pattern disruptor? Was this a good value that you had? Because I'm sort of like you. I grew up as a latchkey kid and we made dinner for ourselves. So many nights, Lucky Charms was my dinner. And so Seth will say to me, like, you can't assume that the only green our kids will eat is like a shamrock marshmallow, And so then I'll be like, well, if you care about it, then you should do it. Right. And then that's the problem, because if you start doing that and you start to dismiss someone else's values, then that's why things often go south. And that's why the beauty of, I think what Galen said in the beginning is so important, that this all comes down to these conversations about your minimum standard of care, your why do you do things this way? And I think it makes you so much more empathetic to come to a compromise. It doesn't mean I'm asking you to rinse every single dish perfectly before it goes in the dishwasher every second. But if you are home and it's COVID and one, you brought up the dishes, but I think I had another woman say to me, her breakthrough with her partner, the conversation was around the fact that for her, during the pandemic, she couldn't control anything. Her life felt completely out of control. Her bosses kept changing. Her kids were out of school. And so for her, dishes and the mess around the house was the only thing they can control during COVID. And so she had a heightened awareness of wanting things to be clean in a way that maybe didn't affect her before. But I thought it was so beautiful that she was able to start to think about why and the articulation around, wow, you know what? My life is chaos right now. So I can only control dishes and the toys that are on the floor. And her partner really was receptive to that why. Yeah.
No, I think I really love what you said when you said that if it's so important to you, then you do it. I think that was sort of like, that was my default around meals, 100%. I was like, if you care so much about them eating, like cooking every single night, like, go for it. Like, it's not my problem. And then we had the conversation and sort of like changed that. And it was really funny because when we first got married, like the first night after our honeymoon, Emma made dinner and I joined her and I was like, oh, this is cute. Our first night in the apartment, like we're cooking dinner together. And then the next night she's like, all right, come help make dinner. And I was like, we're doing that again? I was like, what? We're going to do that again? Like that? For me, it took like, maybe it was a simple meal.
It's
so
like 2 hours. No, but I feel the same way. Like the idea of cooking, like wasting 2 hours, I'm like, this is going to happen every day. You have to be fed like fresh food every day. Yeah. I agree with you. But the problem is, like, if you end up married with two people who have the exact same values, right? Then you and I, if we were together, we would die. You know what I mean? Yeah. So in a way, it's sort of nice when you have a partner that has other values to bring into the conversation, because then your eyes can open up. Like, same thing for Seth. Like when he said that a vegetable was important, I started to think, oh, when was the last time I actually ate a vegetable? And it was probably, I don't know, years earlier.
Yeah, definitely wouldn't. My kids would not be that healthy if they were having TV dinners every night.
Totally.
Yeah. And so another thing I wanted to ask about, like in relation to like skipping to the conversation around unicorn space. So that was a concept that I was really enamored of in Fair Play. And then you wrote a whole another book about it, unicorn space, which I loved as well. And, I'd love to hear, really straight from you, your take on like, how do Fair Play and what is unicorn space first? And then like, how does Fair Play help create unicorn space?
Well, I think what was so alarming to me, back to the fact that I didn't think I would be a gender division of labor expert. I really didn't think a sequel to Fair Play would be a book about creativity. I thought the sequel would be implementing the similar fair play concepts for the workplace, especially for sole proprietors or people who have partners, because I just actually got an email from someone who is a consultant for medical practices and says, if there's two doctors, who's the one who's supposed to pay the bills? Who's the one who's supposed to secure insurance? Who's the one whose name is on the lease? Is it an LLC? Like there was all these questions about fair play for business. And so I am getting into that now, where my premise is that the workplace has much more invisible work than people think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be helpful for people to know that before they get into business with someone else.
Yeah.
Or if they are already in business with someone else, to clarify those expectations. So that's sort of the legal governance stuff I do with my clients. So bringing that back was, to me, the secondary and most important thing next. But what happened and why creativity became the sequel, not that, was because so many people said to me, I'm gaining time back for fair play. Like our home is becoming so much more efficient, but I'm wasting that time. I'm using it now. My leisure time feels terrible. I'm drinking mommy juice. I'm numbing my way through the weekends. I'm taking edibles. I'm binge watching Netflix. I'm taking on more work. So there was no space to even contemplate and dream, Galen, about what this time for themselves could be. And this happened across genders. And yes, some men are better at saying, okay, I'm going to go golf, right? Golf is a great unicorn space because it has the three things that I'm talking about. It's not friendships. It's not just self-care, a walk around the block. Unicorn space are the things that light you up, but that have three things. They have curiosity. I wonder if I can get that ball in the hole. They have connection. You do it with others. I'll bring other men along with me to put the ball in the hole. And completion. I completed 9 holes. So this idea of living a life that has curiosity, connection, and completion. And I joke about golf, but I think we all need to carve that time out for ourselves. But in midlife, it's so hard.
Yeah.
Maybe we do it once a year on a golf trip or a girls trip, but this idea of being consistently interested in our own life as being the antidote to burnout is a lot harder message for people to hear. And that's why it became an entire book.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so what was the last thing you said? Consistently interested in your own life? What was the line? What was what you said?
Yeah. So I wish I'm here to tell you, I wish I really could tell you that a drink with a friend or a once a year trip would solve the burnout that we're all feeling. But actually the only way to do it is to be consistently interested in your own life. That consistent interest in your own life is how you solve burnout. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But I think the hard part was I would ask people in midlife, when was the last time you can tell me the most important thing you did that day was outside your roles as a professional, a partner, a parent? And so many people said to me, there's not even a day I can remember where I did anything.
Yeah.
Outside of being a partner, a parent, or a professional. The most
important thing.
Yeah. And by professional, I mean anybody who's a stay-at-home parent.
Yes.
Working not for pay, or somebody who's a professional and they're working for pay.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I remember one of the things we talked about, which hit me, was the difference between self-care and unicorn space. And I remember that some examples either you gave me or we were talking about, but it was like self-care is like eating a piece of pie, but unicorn space is baking it.
Yes,
or
exactly.
Self-care is like listening to a podcast, but unicorn space is creating it. Like in my case, I think you used that example for me.
Yes.
And I do find that interesting because certainly I think, again, like coming to the conversation around what happens by default is when there's extra room in our calendars, if we're not really conscious of how we're going to use it, like I'm probably going to doom scroll on Facebook or something.
Totally.
And like laugh at reels, which it's not necessarily a negative thing. But then I look at the end of the year and it's like, oh, did I take the time to learn how to play the guitar? Or did I take the time to go for more hikes? Like, did I do all those things that really light me up as opposed to the default of like how I'm going to just fill time?
Exactly. And I think that that's what happens is that our time does get filled, and often it's, sort of to nerd out, these active pursuits we're talking about, the reason why they're so important is because that curiosity, connection, and completion, what it does for us is we see people report that they have happiness activities without meaning. And that's often the hedonic pursuits that we're talking about, like doom scrolling, binge watching TV, drinking. And then we have people who report a lot of meaning without happiness. And that's people who are often taking care of kids, right? I would say, and we know from studies that people would rather be in a root canal chair than be with a toddler, which is how I feel. So it's hard to find those activities where happiness and meaning sort of intersect. And that often comes, why it's not self-care is because it has to have a share with the world component. There has to be some version of, this is a little scary to me, or I can't believe I'm doing this. That sort of sharing with the world piece is how we know we're sort of intersecting with that meaning and the purpose. And that's why it's a little esoteric to say it that way. That's why I always say to people, it's a combination of the curiosity, connection, and completion. That's why I said to you, it's your podcast is a unicorn space, because you're curious about a topic, you're connecting with guests and your audience, and then you do the hard part of completing an episode and editing it and actually putting it out there. And those three things are not so easy, right? There are some people who say, I don't even know what I would be curious about anymore. Yeah. But there's others who say I'm super isolated, and so they don't have the connection. And there's other people who say I have a million of unfulfilled dreams, but like playing the guitar or getting a hole in one in golf or whatever it is. But I don't have the time to practice or to complete those dreams. So it's important to think about why we're losing curiosity, why we're more isolated than ever, why we are living in unfulfilled dreams, like what's preventing us from living that sort of space and that's why I call it unicorn space, because it's like a mythical being. It's like the mythical equine is beautiful and it's magical, but it doesn't fucking exist until we reclaim it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a sort of something that ties into fair play and unicorn space in my life that I hadn't shared. I wanted to wait until the episode to share with you another breakthrough we had as a couple, or at least a result of things. So when we first read Fair Play, Em and I both had either quit or been laid off, like pretty much at the same time. Emma quit a job she hated, and I'd been laid off. Like I'd been downsized to a role in my company, and so it was a real upheaval in our lives. And so I went but there was an element of like I kind of knew how much money I was going to make doing what I was doing because it was like something I'd done before. But Emma had no clue. She was starting from scratch. Like she didn't know if she wanted to be a web designer, like graphic designer, infographic designer. Like she tried everything. So fast forward 4 or 5 years. So right around that time, I just kind of said, well, Emma just has to kind of do everything because like we don't know how much money she's going to make. We don't know if her business is going to work, but we know that I have a somewhat tried and true approach where I can actually make some money and start replacing our income. Well, fast forward. So then we divided things. We've read Fair Play, and I'm like, this is not a great approach. Like I can't just give everything to Emma to take care of because I'm the one who's making money. So fast forward a couple of years, it freed Emma up to spend more time to figure out what she was going to do business wise. So she tried a few different things, and now she's very well established with her business and a goal of like replacing the income she made at the corporate job she left that she hated. And I don't think if we had not read Fair Play, I don't think that would have happened. Like, I think she would have been so bogged down by the stuff that's going on in the house that I don't think she would have been freed up to really figure that out. And we wouldn't have gotten where we are today.
Oh, well, I'm going to cry because that to me is that space that you gifted her is, I mean, it's why I will predict that. That's first of all, why I love you guys as a couple, as you know, but also I just wish more people understood that these short-term investments lead to these long-term returns. You know, it's so important. And so many people, you know, are thinking about the life-changing magic of organizing their junk drawer or whatever, but they don't really think about this life-changing magic of long-term thinking. And I feel the exact same way. I feel that for me and Seth, because as my son told me, one of the most Googled searches, I don't know how he knows this about me, he like looks up our family, is Eve Rodsky still married? And yes, I am. But the the ability for Seth to understand the burdens and to help me lift some of these really hard burdens is literally why I feel like I can be who I need to be. And I'm so much happier, and I get to change the world and be income producing and all the things that I think a lot of men are concerned with when they are the sole breadwinner. Like, what happened to my partner? This one man said to me, and I understand him. And I talk about it in the book, when I would say, "Are you proud of your partner?" I started noticing this pattern of men saying to me, "She's an amazing mother." And I would say, "That's awesome. That's a role. Keep going." And then they would say, "Well, I couldn't do it without her." And I say, "Okay, that's like a personal assistant. So keep going. Like, what else?" And then all of a sudden they would pause and say, "Well, she, used to be, she was the top graduate in her Wharton business class." And I was like, "You're talking about an accomplishment 20 years ago. Like, you're telling me there's nothing you can tell me you're proud about from your partner other than their roles at this moment." And people think that that's the relationship they want, but it's completely not. So I'm the ghost of Christmas future to say, if you think that you want a relationship where you're the sole breadwinner and the person that is doing everything else, you don't want that relationship, because at the end of the day, you're going to wake up and say, I'm not married to the person that I thought I was married to, because they have no time to be themselves.
Yeah, that's really important from that perspective. And like around that of like, what does that person become when they leave behind sort of a lot of the things that they did when you fell in love with them or met them. So that's pretty interesting. And in my case, like Emma and I've talked about this, where like I have in my world, income fluctuates a lot. Like I'm not a salaried employee. I'm a business owner. So I don't know what things will look like any given year. I didn't know how COVID would affect things. Like so many things, like I'm not just sitting around collecting a salary. But when her business started taking off, it was a very new experience for us of like, oh, and for me, it's like, it's not just all on me. Like if I have a bad month or a bad quarter or whatever, there's buffer there. Like it's both of us contributing, and it's definitely changed things like 100%. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the goal of everyone who's in a similar situation, but I think that Emma, she left a job as a chemical engineer, like highly educated, highly proficient at streamlining processes. And then was like, okay, how can I keep using this skill set? And I think that if she hadn't figured that out, she would have been quite unfulfilled in that arena of her life of, am I really creating something or producing something that's helping people? So
I didn't know that was her background, which is not ironic, but it's actually very much consistent with my data, which is that the people who ultimately gravitated towards fair play were people in science, people in the military, and people who had backgrounds in sports, because they understood this idea of what systems can do for you when you sort of trade assumptions for structured decision-making tools. So it's interesting that she's an engineer.
Oh yeah, like systems is her jam.
Yeah,
so the cards and everything resonated
exactly
completely.
I love her.
No doubt about it. Yeah, and I know she found like her first reason was, I think, because she was basically going through all of Reese Witherspoon's books, like with the books that Reese Witherspoon was promoting, and then she saw this one, and I think that's what happened. Is then she got it from the library, brought it home, read it, lovingly nudged me to read it, and it took me a little while to listen to her and read it. But the process is that makes sense that people
it's a long, this is the good news is that if anything good in life is a practice, and I think that's the most important thing. Fair play, what we're talking about today, is a practice. If you're hearing this for the first time, it can feel overwhelming. How can I implement systems if things have been the same as you said earlier? But I think the beauty of these conversations is that just even the awareness that it could be different, it could look different, I think is so empowering, because, this is 2023. I started this journey with Seth in 2011. So it's definitely not a short-term investment, but similar to exercise. There are some people, when I would talk to them about their systems in the division of labor, they would say to me, well, yeah, I had the conversation with Galen, 10 years ago, and it just didn't go well. It sort of like reminds me of going into a doctor's office and saying, like, how's your exercise practice? And saying, well, I ran, in 1999 and I didn't like it. And like, so I've never tried to move again. Right. Practices are practice, right? I mean, they have to be consistent. There has to be a commitment to coming back to the table. And so that's why I did fair play as a game, because I thought, well, if you're going to have to come back to the table, if it's a practice, at least we can make it fun.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, I love how you said about implementation. It's like grab one card and
Just
get
one.
curious about, okay, what do you think should happen here and why? And like really discover. I mean, we learned a lot about each other during the process of going through those cards, of like, like a lot of assumptions about what was important and why, but not really having any sort of structured conversation around it, which made it very different.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad, like I said, what's so wonderful about the conversations, I think, are that some of the joy is in realizing that a lot of these cards, as we said earlier, are not just chores and housework. There are core memories. There are humanity. They make us who we are. Like some of my most formative memories are in a grocery store. Like being in Pathmark with my mother on the Lower East Side and having it be freezing. I remember the produce sections and her teaching me what a unit price was, because we couldn't afford, the nicer things. I always just wanted like Tide or one of the things that had color. I guess we would like pick up the No Frills brand for detergent. And I was like, why do we just have to get No Frills spaghetti? So, you can learn a lot about somebody, even if you surprise a colleague and say to them, I've been doing these cards, like who did the grocery shopping in your house growing up? There's a lot of fun. And I would say that if your listeners, if you have business partners, if you're in a business practice where there's partners or other people that are in that practice, even just starting to like ask these questions of them is really interesting.
Absolutely. I love it. Yeah. So, I mean, I love this conversation of fair play, unicorn space. I think that unicorn space is really, I think it's like you said, there's some like, what is it that we've lost this ability to sort of, or either lost or just don't have, of like specifically seeking out ways to engage in our curiosity and connection. And I think it's a very, very good question and like a great thing to explore. And so what's next? Like to kind of wrap it up, like what's next for Eve Rodsky and discoveries that you're up to?
Well, I would say, obviously, as you know, we had a Jennifer Newsom. I was part of a documentary called Fair Play. So if this is interesting to you, but you're like, I don't read, you can find Fair Play on Hulu. I would say it's a really fun watch. Because a lot of the couples, I think you'll at least resonate with some of what they're arguing about, and sort of it's just sort of a little bit more humorous. And then I'm really now thinking about, since the pandemic, right? What is the future of work? What does it look like if we can understand work as important ownership tasks, similar to fair play, as opposed to just this, amorphous, I go to work. So really breaking that down is what I'm looking at now. And that's my goal, is to write a book about fair play for the workplace.
Very cool. Yeah. And I love that because it all ties together. Like, I mean, it's one of those things where wherever you're spending your time, whether it be at work or at home or with friends, like can be influenced by these approaches. Right. So
yeah, I'm excited. I'm going to give you the cards, and maybe some of your listeners will be beta testers for me. So if you're in a sole proprietorship or you have a partner in a practice, please reach out to me on DM at Eve Rodsky. I'd love for you to test out the cards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's make sure everyone knows where to find out more about you. We follow you in lots of different places. So let's make sure everyone knows where to find out, where to get more. Yeah. So go for it.
So I'd say at Fair Play Life is on Instagram is probably the most fun place to follow us. But sort of the more angry, dark version is my personal Instagram at Eve Rodsky. But definitely we answer DMs there, and we're always looking for more data. So
absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on here. I always love exploring these topics and like really looking at how they can make a difference in people's lives, as they have in mine and Emma's and our kids' lives. So thank you so much.
And thank you, Emma, out there. We appreciate you so much. Thank you for getting to know me over the pandemic. So
absolutely. Awesome. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for having joined me on this episode of A Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I truly appreciate you taking the time to do so. It really warms my heart to see the numbers of people listening to each episode go up, and it's just a lot of fun. Be sure to check back through past episodes to find insight on everything from more efficient charting practices to better sleep for physicians and much more. If you'd like to make sure you're leveraging your corporation effectively for taxes, retirement, legacy, and other financial matters important to physicians, please head on over to GalenHelpsDocs.com to check out the work that we do with fee-based planning. Our fee-based plans are powerful, customized to you, and there's no requirement to buy products from us and no hidden commissions. You get clear, unbiased recommendations based on our expertise helping hundreds of incorporated Canadians, just like you, create their ideal financial life and future. Again, it's GalenHelpsDocs.com. Click on the Book a Call button at the top for a quick and free conversation to find out whether fee-based planning makes sense for you. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care and see you at the next episode.